Hi, Othmar.
Hi.
Good
Do
to
you
see
hear
you
me?
and good to have you on board. I think we
Yes.
are all ready to go. Great to have you all, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome at the third webinar of the European Parliamentary Financial Services Forum. The EPFSF is, as you know, a forum for debate with the European Parliament, led by Othmar Karas, with members from the financial industry, but also other stakeholders and civil society. And over the past months, and since the COVID-19 crisis hit us, we've organized a number of webinars, and this one is the third. Of course, we have examined responses of Europe. What can Europe do to head this crisis and to find the road to recovery? So we have examined in the past the resilience of the banking system and the capital level of the banking system and how it was supporting the economy. We have looked, of course, at the digital challenges and the cybersecurity challenges and the payments resilience throughout this period. And now we are at the third third webinar, where we will look at recovery, because indeed recovery is needed, and governments and the Council and the European Parliament are working hard on the plan that was proposed by the European Commission. The question is, should we use this also as an opportunity to get our twin transitions to the twin transitions as announced by Commission President von der Leyen? One is the digital, and the other one on which we will focus today will be the one dealing with the sustainable transformation of our economy. Because indeed there is no doubt that millions and billions will be needed to make sure that we have an economy in which people can thrive, in which business can work, in which SMEs can work. But it should also be, we should not lose an eye towards our future, towards a more sustainable economy. So that's the question of today. And we have, of course, our chairman who will introduce, but I am also very happy to welcome Roger Havenith, the Deputy CEO of the International Investment Fund. And then we have Olivier Boutellis-Taft, the CEO of Accountancy Europe, who will say how accountancy can help, how can the way in which we administrate things help us in getting a more sustainable and stimulating a more sustainable economy. The view of investments by Bernhard, Chief Investment Officer of INVESCO, and the banking side by Toni Ballabriga. But most important, we will also have an open discussion with the members of the European Parliament, who I warmly welcome, who are also online. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor to our chairman, Othmar Karas.
Honorable members of the European Parliament, honorable speakers, dear Wim, dear Mr. Havenith, dear ladies and gentlemen. First, thank you very much for organizing and of the third EPFSF webinar. Wim mentioned it. I'm very happy that we have with us the Deputy Chief Executive of the European Investment Fund, and as always, some excellent speakers from the financial sector and from different associations, especially the small and medium-sized enterprises. The objective of our session is clear. We want to discuss how we can realize a sustainable European economic recovery. And also not only an economic recovery, also a social recovery in our member states and in the European Union. Today we had also the ECOFIN Council who discussed it. Not everybody was so positive as the European Parliament and we are. I think our financial response to COVID-19 is an opportunity to step up our efforts to achieve our strategic objectives, including sustainability in our recovery. I think with this big money we have on the table, I think we have not only to react, we have to invest into our future and to have to organize the European Union with all our different goals and challenges in a very in a serious way. That is also a chance to change something, not only the own resources we are discussing. So where we are in this report, I think first, as you know, we have adopted a package of 3 initiatives as fire extinguishers of 540 billion euros, part of which is the European Guarantee Fund, managed by the IEB Group and the European Investment Fund, which should mobilize up to 200 billion euros of investment. I am sure that in his remarks, Mr. Havenith will go into more details about the state of play of implementation, including the support for SMEs. Second, some moments ago, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, we had the final vote in the Committee of Monetary and Economic Affairs on the informal agreement between the European Parliament and the Council on the CRR quick fix. As you know, these measures should give an additional boost to bank lending to citizens and business of up to 450 billion euros this year. I don't expect any problems for the plenary vote, though the quick fix can enter into force still in the second quarter this year. Third, since 27th of May, the proposals by President von der Leyen on the recovery program Next Generation EU and the revised long-term EU budget are on the table. Today, the EU finance ministers, I mentioned it, will discuss them. Next week, the European Parliament will have a debate, and on the 19th of June, the European Council is discussing, and I will be an optimist to decide. Generally, I think the Commission's approach is in many respects the right one. Incorporate the key requests made by the European Parliament and represents a good basis for the upcoming talks with the Parliament and the Council. I especially welcome the size of the recovery fund of 750 billion euros, the healthy mixture of 2/3 of grants and 1/3 of loans, the spending via EU programs. This is a guarantee for that it is EU money and not specially national money. And it's our EU programs. And so we can say all money is going in the same direction in all member states to achieve our common goals and to make the European Union stronger. The link to the second one is the link to the European semester and the investment focus on Green Deal, digital agenda, and more resilience. The Green Deal is not outside the recovery plan, it's a strong corner, a strong pillar inside the recovery fund. A new funding tool of recovery bonds guaranteed by the EU budget, the more towards new own resources, including a fair EU digital tax, the democratic scrutiny by the European Parliament on the spending via EU programs, the new allocation key for cohesion money under REACT-EU, and the new dedicated European Union Health Program, EU for Health. For a sustainable economic recovery, especially relevant initiatives are the new Recovery Resilience Facility to support sustainable reforms and investments in the member states, the doubling of the EU, the INVESCO guarantee to mobilize private investments, and the new taxonomy sustainable finance, which will be adopted by the European Parliament next week in plenary. And of course, the role of financial markets is crucial. Yesterday, ECB President Christine Lagarde mentioned in our committee that the euro was the main currency of the denomination for the issuance of green bonds in 2019. And as we know, the European Investment Bank was the first issuer of green bonds in 2007. Last year, a record of 31% share of IEB financing went into climate action projects. Against this background, I also have some questions to our speakers from the financial sector. First, is the demand for green investment still increasing? Second, are the banks able to satisfy this demand? Third, what additional measures are needed in the future for more sustainable investment? But first, let me give the floor to Mr. Havenith to give us an insight into the current work, role and priorities of the European Investment Fund. Thank you very much for all of you to accept our invitation. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Perfect. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to participate in this online discussion on how best to rebuild the European economy. I'm very happy to offer an EIF perspective, but also very interested to hear from you, from other speakers, members of the European Parliament, and also industry professionals. Let me start with a quote from Herbert Hoover, who was the president of the United States as the Great Depression started. And he said at that time, about the time we can make ends meet, somebody moves the ends. And I think this sums up very well where we are today. Having clawed our way back from the financial economic crisis for the last 10 years now a virus hosted by a bat has moved the ends. In addition to the human drama of lost lives and hundreds of thousands of people suffering from the virus infection, we are also paying a heavy economic price. And I was looking at the Commission communication, and it is spelling out that we expect a 7.5% drop in EU GDP in 2020, this year. And this may further increase up to 16%, depending on the severity of a potential wave, second wave of infections and subsequent shutdowns. So this is unprecedented. And we are witnessing a disruption across all kinds of sectors, in the production, in the supply chains, in consumption, but also in consumer investor confidence. Some sectors in particular are particularly hard hit. Of course, tourism, hospitality, entertainment, and transportation, but also others like manufacturing, retail. And we are afraid that we will feel the impact for many years to come. And as it is usual in such crises, it's the smallest who are hit the hardest. And I'm thinking here of the millions of small and medium-sized enterprises, of the small mid-caps, but also of the self-employed and the vulnerable groups in our society. And I think you referred here in your introduction to the societal challenges. At the same time, we are also looking at a banking sector facing increased risk across their balance sheets. In the private equity ecosystem, we see that the investments are diminishing, the exit market is stalling, and fundraising is becoming much harder. We are regularly, of course, in contact with the funds in which we invest, and there are several hundreds of them. And in a recent survey that we conducted in mid-March, about 77% of the fund managers said that they believe they will be negatively impacted in their fundraising by the COVID-19 crisis. And they expect an average delay now in fundraising of around 7 months. Exit negotiations, even in cases where there were imminent exits, are now halted or aborted. And if these lockdown measures continue for some while, then fund managers expect to lose up to 1/4 of their portfolio due to capital challenge. So the question is, how do we rebuild this? What are the elements we need to consider here? Well, first of all, I think time is of essence. The most important element in our collective reaction is, in my opinion, speed, time to market. We don't have time for long discussions about the architecture of new programs and new instruments. We need to work with what we know. Well, tried and tested over many years, focusing on those actions that have the most immediate impact. So we need solutions that can incentivize private sector participation and crowd in also private funds. Although we have huge amounts this time of public money, it will not be sufficient unless we partner up with the private sector and align their interests on the public policy objectives that we pursue. Secondly, we need significant firepower. We need deep pockets if you want to have a significant impact. This is one thing that we are traditionally missing in the EU. Large funds, large ticket sizes, large ambitions. And I'm happy, of course, to see that this is changing positively. Interventions that are large enough to make a difference in a global arena where our competitors are wielding much more firepower, often backed by the state, like in China. Looking at venture capital, for instance, in the private equity field, we have much smaller fund sizes, barely reaching 100 million. In the US, it exceeds 140 million. But more indicative for me is that Europe is home to just 7% of the world's leading technology companies. This means 32 out of 448. We need deeper pockets if you want to compete on the global stage to support future champions and keep the innovation potential and jobs and growth here in Europe. Well-designed public interventions capable of crowding in private money are key in this respect. In a recent survey again that the EIF conducted with more than 300 fund managers, we were told that 2/3 of the respondents agree that governmental support encourages other private LPs to invest. But at the same time, more than half of the respondents say that the European VC funds are too small to be attractive to large private institutional investors. The focus of public interventions, in my opinion, should be first on addressing, of course, the liquidity, immediate and working capital needs. Then we need to rebuild the capital base. And in the third stage, once the ecosystems have been stabilized, we need to turn again to our policy priorities and focus more specifically on technological sovereignty, life sciences, circular economy, and all the other areas of strategic importance for the EU. In this regard, I certainly welcome the Commission's swift response, and in particular the Solvency Support Instrument and InvestEU. Alongside with the EIB's group's Pan-European Guarantee Fund, which is focusing on SMEs and guarantee instruments, not so much on equity, but also risk share and debt products, this is a very good start. These are indeed ambitious proposals with significant firepower, and they build on existing instruments, which saves us all precious time. The Commission's proposals also include a focus on equity, hybrid equity and quasi-equity measures, which is very promising. It's important that we use all avenues to reach out and support SMEs and innovative entrepreneurs who have the potential to drive the European economy forward. I would have even liked to consider mezzanine finance as well. At the same time, we need to keep in mind certain risks. One important consideration, I think it was referred to in the introduction, is the risk of fragmentation. If you have a mosaic of only national measures, we could be taking a step back in our efforts towards the single market and capital markets union. We cannot afford to go down that road. Instead, we need EU-level instruments that keep the Union interconnected and open. In order not to undermine also previous work, I would also underline the need to keep in mind the dual transitions to a green and digital economy in these efforts. And this was very prominently addressed already in introduction. I couldn't agree more. Climate action cannot be put on hold while we sort out the economy again. And at the same time, as we step up our support to European businesses and the ecosystem that we have built over many years, we need to keep in mind the growth stage funding gap that we have in Europe. We have one in the early stage, but even more prominently in the growth stage. Many entrepreneurs need the financial support they need when it comes to growing the company to the next level and taking on the global competition. Too often, that financing comes from outside Europe, from deeper pockets, from more ambitious investors, and the EU loses brainpower, entrepreneurs, know-how, growth, and fiscal revenues. It's indicative, for instance, that in the period of 2003 until 15, an average of 44% of all the business that we had invested on and exited were acquired by non-European buyers. So financially, perfect for the EIF, politically rather a disaster. Non-European investors are also leading in later funds, in later fundraising rounds. And let me also stress that Asia is coming along very strongly. If you look at 2012, less than 10 years ago, they invested some 4 million in 11 companies. But 10 years later, they invested already 1.8 billion in 117 European technology companies. So let me stress, we cannot afford to be the incubator for other industrialized countries. We are not there just to take the highest risk in the early stage and then to leave the best performing companies to the US, China, and other industrialized countries. So to conclude, I think it's important to take the current challenges as an opportunity to act collectively in a more and more coordinated way. I think we need to focus on tried and tested formulas to ensure an immediate response. But as we work to steady the ship, we need to maintain our focus on the EU strategic priorities. And this means if we do so, then we will come out of this crisis stronger, more resilient, and more competitive. I'm quite confident in this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Havenith. And what you said was very important, and you took it broader. It's indeed climate action that must be taken, but you also talk, and that is very important, about the ability of Europe to hold on to its unicorns. Because there's a lot of creativity and there's a lot of entrepreneurship and there are many small companies, but indeed we all seen that if they go over a certain threshold, usually around $20 million, they leave Europe to continue their business from elsewhere. So that's also something that we really need as an issue. Just one remark. I see that a screen is being shared. I can imagine that this is not meant to happen, but it is possible to actually end this. Othmar, I think that it might be you. To quickly continue, because we only have an hour and so much ground was already covered by the two speakers, I would like to move to Olivier Boutellis-Taft, the CEO of Accountancy Europe, to now give us their perspective. And indeed, a lot of ground was covered, and the accountancy profession has an important role, because indeed, in the build-up and the recovery, we need to be able to see what is possible and what is not possible. Because as we sometimes saw in banking regulation, we have also seen that sometimes there are pro-cyclical measures, and it's actually the help of the accountancy profession that we were able to take some of these pro-cyclical measures out, or at least dampen their effect. So Olivier, without much ado, I give you the floor welcome for your contribution, and please feel free to also react to the other speakers.
Thank you very much, Wim. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
I think this is a phrase that I've been repeating most often these days. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Probably a sign of the time. So thank you very much for the EPFSF for tabling this very relevant discussion today. And I will insist on the sustainability aspect of the European economic recovery. As you know, accountants are pretty down to earth, and I think earth is actually very important right now. We all know the economy is in bad shape, but the reality is that our ecosystems and our climate are even in a worse shape. Just as a reminder, according to the United Nations Environmental Programme, we're now on a 3.2 degrees trajectory. That's pretty far from the 1.5 objective of the Paris Agreement. And that is what we will be reaching in 2050, even if we comply with the Paris Agreement. So that is far from the objective of a Green Deal of being carbon neutral in 2050, and that is far from being sustainable. I know that some of us are rejoiced by the massive drop of carbon emissions resulting from the lockdown. This is unprecedented. I think we're around 6% or something, according to the Global Carbon Project. But however, I see two big buts. Well, first of all, we would need a similar decrease every year for the next 10 years to maintain a livable planet. And in reality, these reductions that are resulting from the lockdown do not reflect structural changes in our economy or in our transport or energy system. It's not me speaking. It's actually a group of scientists who recently published a couple of weeks ago their study in Nature. So I'm afraid the chances are pretty high to go back to normal and perhaps even worse. I mean, if you remember, during the financial crisis, we saw a reduction of global CO2 emissions. In 2009, the emissions actually shrank by more or less 1.5%. The next year, in 2010, they already grew by more than 5%, well above the long-term average. So the last thing we need for a sustainable recovery is going back to business as usual. And this is why a recent paper by Accountancy Europe entitled Corona Crisis: Lessons for a More Sustainable Future calls for structural change. Along these lines, I would just like to share 4 ideas with you today on what we should do to foster a sustainable recovery. And I think the first one is for all of us lobbyists in the room. I think we also need to change, and we need to support an EU transformative agenda. I must confess that I admire the courage of the European Commission and the voices like Othmar, who we've heard today, who promote a sustainable recovery and who remind us not to forget about the climate. I am less convinced about what I'm hearing from the member state, who seem to be rushing to go back to business as usual, stimulating car sales and subsidizing airlines, two not terribly green industries, let's be honest. So I think we in the lobbying community need to support the European Commission, not just by praising the objectives and sometimes doing everything we can to slow down change in the backstage, as we very often do. So I think we need to take this recovery seriously. Second idea, I think, is that we need to improve resilience and risk management, especially in SMEs. And more particularly in the small, high potential companies that we don't want to see go. I entirely agree. The accountancy paper that I just mentioned speaks about the contribution of accountants, because it's too easy to always talk about what others should do. So we at Accountancy Europe are stimulating our own members to change. Accountants have the multidisciplinary expertise to help business assess their financial, but also their non-financial impacts and risk, and upgrade their risk management programs. The third point, I think, is absolutely fundamental. We need to move to a circular economy. Because honestly, I don't think we have really figured out yet what exactly a sustainable economy would look like. The one thing we know is that it doesn't look like what we've been doing for the past 40 years. A sustainable economy is anything but business as usual. So if we talk about growth, whatever is the color of this growth, I think it cannot be growth of extraction. It cannot be growth of consumption. It cannot be growth of waste and pollution. We've already crossed 3 of the 9 planetary boundaries and are therefore threatening the conditions of life on the planet. The only sustainable economy would be a circular economy. This means that most companies need to change their business models. Corporate governance is absolutely essential in this field, where accountants are also supporting change. We recently published a thought leadership paper just on that topic, on how we can leverage corporate governance to that end. And finally, my fourth suggestion would be that the public sector needs to change too. A lot of our members at Accountancy Europe are professional accountants working in the public sector, in ministries of finance, in tax directorates, and also in local governments. And we just issued a paper discussing their role in the current context. They will have, for instance, to help leveraging public finance to make the necessary investment in our health systems that really require an upgrade in many member states. Right now, we see that a lot of subsidies are being distributed. While this should be done in a transparent way, we must control that they are used as intended, and hopefully that the counterparties are fulfilled. So we will also need to measure their efficiency. So we need more financial information on these subsidies and how they're used. With the prospect of growing debt in highly uncertain circumstances, I think we need to stress test government borrowing capacity. And to that end, again, proper financial information and assurance is needed. I think other speakers will and have already discussed the scale of investment that is needed, but it's not only a matter of scale, but also a matter of practicality. And I think accountants play an important role in facilitating the connection between, on the one hand, governmental announcement, often very optimistic, bankers, often very realistic, and entrepreneurs, often very desperate. So especially in SMEs. And I think accountants help these 3 work together, which is important. And in addition to policy and support, I think we should not forget that the public sector represents up to 50% of the economy across Europe. So it is also time for the public sector to lead by example and integrate financial and non-financial information and performance and aim for integrated performance. These are the 4 ideas I would like to contribute to this debate today. Thank you very much for listening. Happy to continue the discussion.
Well, thank you very much, Olivier. And indeed, I must say, I was thinking when public sector was optimistic, bankers too realistic, I immediately thought, what are accountants? So but I understand they connect all the dots. And
stay down to earth.
We've now publicly announced that we will hold you to that. But let me, by the way, remind all the speakers, and thank you very much for an excellent contribution, Olivier, also of the questions. And the more we get into investors and bankers, the questions of Othmar, is the demand still on the rise for green investment? Because that is indeed I think very important. Can the banks and investors deal with that demand, and are there outstanding obstacles? And Olivier touched upon the obstacles, and partly also on the political will that is behind these obstacles. So, but let me now quickly move on to Bernhard Langer, because as an investor, you were referred to quite a number of times. The first is, of course, how can we make Europe attractive enough of investors going forward? And what do you need to be able to invest in Europe? And how do you see using the recovery to go to a more sustainable economy? So Bernhard, please, you have the floor.
No, thank you. And thank you for inviting me. I want to do two things. First, maybe to clarify what I'm doing for a living. So I'm a chief investment officer, I'm an asset manager, and I'm coming from the quant factor sector. So I'm assessing forecasts by using mathematic models, and we invest in exchange traded assets. So that's, I think, important to understand our perspective. And I'd like to do in my couple of minutes two things. So first, maybe I give you just a very brief evolution as we are in this field almost since 25 years. And then I would let's say, bring my wish list issues, opportunities regarding the Green Deal and sustainable finance. And of course, at the end, I will answer Othmar's questions. So again, as I said, we are investing in the sustainability ESG field since almost 25 years. And what was at this point in time something a niche, or maybe some foundations, church-related clients had, you have to adapt your investment approach with exclusion. And exclusion is always a bad thing because your universe is shrinking and your opportunity sets go smaller. But again, we found our way around it, and I think we made a lot of investments there and progress. Since I would say 5-6 years, the ESG development and the demand in ESG and the focus has increased so much that even if this is not your philosophy, you have to do something about it. And what do I mean is we distinguish always between two things. One is a return factor and the other one is a risk factor. On the return side, I think we all believe if a company is looking at sustainability, is managing the business with certain criteria, it should be a good business, and at the end it should be a better business than others. This was in the past hard to convince in a numerical sense. We all believe in it, but the hard numbers were hard to achieve. You can always do some things. Especially as I'm a quant, I can present you almost everything and anything. However, it was crystal clear it has become a risk factor. And I mean a risk factor is if a company has been downgraded in any measures or has any problem related to ESG, this has a severe impact on the performance of a company and subsequently, of course, the performance on the stock market. So this means everybody had to pay attention on this, and so it started on the low side, but more and more it's becoming almost every day's work, almost for everyone. And again, what I said on the return side, the interesting thing is that especially in this crisis, in this COVID crisis, I think it's the very first time we can really make the statement, and we did write some papers around it, that companies who were looking at ESG criteria, so ranking and rating very high on this scale, did better than the rest. So again, this is something which I see a lot of potential going forward. And again, also the European Union, as everybody is aware, is doing a lot of things to push this agenda. And we are already seeing this in the European capital markets. So as an asset manager, you have to pay attention regardless what your personal philosophy or the philosophy of your firm is. Coming now to the area of opportunities, my wish list and also issues. And a big issue, of course, is data. The challenge around data availability, and also that we have an even playing field. This area, as it's now also commercially more interesting and getting more and more attention, of course, all the rating agencies of the world are jumping into this, offering certain criteria, ratings, rankings, and what have you. And sometimes the quality of those things could be challenged as there is a lot of confusion going on. And again, we desperately need some standards there. So a common criteria, what does ESG mean, which sounds so pretty obvious, is not there. So as long as we don't have, let's say, here an agreement, I think it's a little bit blurred, and it's hard that then everybody is talking about the same thing. I understand that there's a lot of good intention also by the Commission, by the Parliament, by all the EU institutions. However, maybe a little bit the opportunity lies, maybe if things are not well implemented, maybe they are causing more damage than they could do good. So here's, I think, a lot of room to improve. Closing now with the 3 questions Othmar said. The first, the demand question. I have to tell you that I'm working with institutional clients around Europe and also with retail clients and platforms. In every meeting in the last 2 years, ESG is a topic. And again, the measures and planned activities and legislations and rules from the EU is driving this further. Again, my remarks to this level playing field is very critical, because we are still trying to figure out what this all means. But the demand is really increasing, and it's topical in any and every discussion with our investors. What's on the product side? Of course, what I just said, that also means that the product side is very blurred. So it's not clear. There's not a definition. People doing a lot of things. For the consumer, I think we need a certain standard, what they can look at, a certain orientation. And I said, my remarks to the, let's say, data uncertainty we have in this field. Not everything which is now presented, if you look to certain web pages, you can look for a fund. There are certain, again, ratings and rankings. There's a lot of challenges we have to overcome until, let's say, the European consumer has something he can rely on. And this is, again, back to the measures needed. So this we welcome, of course, as an asset manager. It goes without saying, the capital market union is a must. And again, I would say on the Green Deal in sustainable finance regulations, again, an even level playing field is essential. That would be all my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And indeed, important remarks. Indeed, you recall again how incredibly important taxonomy is, but you also said clearly that it went from a niche market to a risk to hopefully an opportunity. So we have an opportunity here. Now, what is important is how can we make sure that retail investors can share in the possible investment opportunities. And indeed, this morning I talked to the German presidency and asked them indeed that the review of MiFID, in my view, should go back to the simplicity the basics that it had in MiFID 1, rather than put another level of complexity, like creating other categories. Because indeed, it is important in the Capital Markets Union that we have this deep and liquid capital market, but that we indeed enable consumers also to have clear investment products which they can clearly compare. And here, I think you answered part of the question, the third question of Othmar when he was asking for obstacles. The good thing is, time flies when you're having fun, which is the case right now. So I quickly move on to Toni Ballabriga, who is an old friend of mine, and I must say somebody I deeply respect, because he has been around and in ESG investment, in green investments from the start, and for many years already played with different ways of looking at it and trying to move the political debate. So Toni, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Wim. I suppose you can hear me?
Yes. And
okay.
Even better.
Fantastic. Okay, I hope you are all safe. Thank you very much for your kind invitation. I would like to share our views on how to rebuild the EU economy in a sustainable way from the banking perspective. Well, in fact, as a privilege to chair the Sustainable Finance Working Group at the European Banking Federation, I would like to mention a report that will be published very soon that will analyze the role of banking sector and intends to contribute to the EU policy makers' debate on the recovery post-COVID-19. It has been widely observed that the crisis has led to greater awareness of the importance of environmental issues such as biodiversity, as well as social challenges such as the inequality gap, in addition to the climate change. While the crisis is ongoing and public health is still main focus, governments, businesses, and households must start looking beyond the survival phase. And from the perspective of the sector I represent today, I can confirm that banks are committed and banks are ready to support our clients and the whole European society. Trying to respond to the third question that was placed in the beginning. So therefore, the current crisis has made clear that Europe needs a sustainable, fair, and inclusive recovery, and now is the moment to act. Now it's time for a green, fair, and resilient plan, despite of the COVID-19 crisis. It is paramount that European institutions and national governments follow with the European Green Deal without delays. In this sense, we fully welcome the Next Generation EU plan proposed by the European Commission, applying to repair damage, but also to press fast forward on the twin green and digital transitions. A plan proposing a new 750 billion recovery instrument embedded in the EU budget, plans to reserve 25% of this spending for climate-friendly expenditure and its alignment with the green finance taxonomy are particularly welcome. And we like especially concrete proposals such as support to building renovation, renewables, hydrogen, and clean mobility. So we also congratulate the Green Recovery Alliance promoted by the European Parliament, which we fully support also as a BBVA institution. But the question is how to embed sustainable finance in this recovery or reshape. Let's share some proposals and requests from the banking perspective, trying to come back to one of the first questions placed. So focusing on sustainable finance, we have, as you know, a lot of different initiatives in place. One very relevant is the open consultation on the renewed sustainable finance strategy. Let me say that we believe the action plan for sustainable growth, created 2 years ago, create the fundamentals, but now actions must be accelerated to mainstream sustainable finance. The renewed sustainable finance strategy must focus on a right set of incentives to mobilize the much needed financial resources to support a sustainable recovery at a larger scale. Some components are key in this new strategy. Let's share some specific proposals and requests. First, we think that we need to speed up the social agenda, social standards and metrics. The moment is now, so the European Commission must accelerate the creation of the social taxonomy because the social dimension relevance has significantly increased due to the health crisis. The EC Sustainable Finance Strategy should reflect that before, or at least in parallel with the implementation of the other 4 goals of the environmental taxonomy. Second, we also need incentives to proper the necessary transformation. Despite some progress, we still need to substantially scale up sustainable activities. Some proposals: appropriately targeted fiscal benefits applied with reason as well as an adequate carbon price, and redirection of subsidies may play an important role in mobilizing the switch towards more sustainable actions. Also, alternative forms of financing, such as the aggregation of small-scale projects, could generate an attractive structure and size for institutional investors. So green securitization and also green covered bonds could be great tools. And then also the introduction of a potential supporting factor for certain eligible assets, such as in green mortgages, could seriously consider it, as we believe, in its potential to contribute to the Commission's financing objectives in the context of the European Renovation Financing Facility that is in Vegas. Third proposal, we think that we need to work for stronger coordination with different regulators, supervisors, and worldwide. 2 main requests. At European level, the ECB and the EVA and the national supervisors and the private banking sector should jointly develop in a cooperative manner all the prudential measures that might be considered necessary. Overlappings and inconsistencies need to be avoided because they could generate uncertainty. In this sense, we celebrate the ECB guide on climate and environmental risk, a comprehensive and ambitious set of 13 expectations that are not binding for the institutions, but rather it serves as a basis for the supervisory dialogue. It really connects with other key frameworks such as TCFD, but we must ensure that is the perfect synchronicity with all other regulation initiatives, especially the non-financial reporting directive that is being reviewed and the taxonomy implementation. At the international level, we think that we need a more prominent role of the International Platform for Sustainable Finance, coordinating taxonomies, disclosure requirements, and the full involvement of international standard setters. And finally, the fourth proposal, the fourth line of proposals is, as commented before, we need data and better corporate disclosure. So first, the European Commission's consultation on the non-financial reporting directive is the right step in the right direction. We think maybe that should be considered not only as an update of the directive, but also regulation package. Initiatives such as TCFD framework or ESG standards as GRI or SASB are very helpful, but I agree with my colleague Bernhard from INVESCO that we need a set of universal minimum official ESG standards and metrics covering the most important data set and disclosure requirements. And we think that Europe must take the lead. And also, finally, we think also regarding to data, we think that a single EU-free single ESG data and report repository will also be very helpful. Robust, countable, and reliable ESG data on companies is also key to identify and assess sustainability risk and lending activities. So to conclude, let me conclude with some final words of the Green Recovery Alliance. COVID-19 will not make climate change and nature degradation go away. We will not win the fight against COVID-19 without a solid economic response. Let's not oppose those two battles, but let's fight and win them at the same time. By doing so, we will only be stronger together. Thank you very much.
Very, very clear. So now you have a full overview, and indeed, what I very much liked is that Mr. Havenith put it in a strategic perspective. What do we want to do as Europe? Where do we want to do? What do we want to do with this recovery that is so needed, not only for businesses and families and companies, but also to make sure we cannot go back. We need to make sure that we meet our climate goals. At the same time, we also need to move on because we've shown that the digital resilience of Europe is essential because we have been counting completely on a digital environment. So all these broader steps and what kind of rules we named were put forward. So now I'd like to open the floor for the members of the European Parliament who have been listening, because again, I think we have a full overview, but feel free to ask questions and ask us difficult questions, because I can honestly say also trying to work on especially the sustainability aspect, it is very hard to get the right economic incentive on one hand and to also make sure that that we do not lose our climate goals at the same time. So please, Othmar or any of his colleagues, please feel free to ask any question to the speakers. Othmar, do you have a feeling that your questions were answered? I think there was a big compliment to the European Commission and the European Parliament also built in, because we do feel that we are getting help, but you can also see that the taxonomy is really important. Sorry, Othmar, I think I've lost you.
Oh, you don't.
Any other
with my micro
colleagues? Yeah.
Oh.
Any
but I can say that thank you very much also for the answers. I think that is not only an answer what you it's a support, and we have to go to the details. It's much easier to say that we are on the right way. Now we have to implement the ideas, and my wish to you is also please ask, meet your ministers of finance. Please be part of the national debates. What I read in some newspapers, also in my own country, in Austria, the governments are not explaining and analyzing what the European Commission and the Parliament want, what we need. They are only looking to their national interests, and they attack in some points the proposal. So please be part also of the national debates, the debate in the media, open platforms for dialogue, and help us to be also very clear in the details.
Yeah, that is clear. A revert to the national discussion, because indeed what we need, and I think all speakers were absolutely clear about it, the only way to get recovery is we do it together, if we come up with European solutions and not national solutions. There's no doubt. Are there any other members of the European Parliament who want? Yes, please.
Yes, I'll come in. Francis Fitzgerald.
Hi, Francis.
Hi, how are you all from Dublin? Yes, thank our speakers very much. Just a point I want to make in relation to, we have seen huge solidarity from the public in many of our countries in terms of the way they've responded. And we've had very clear communication for the most part, certainly here in Ireland, from government on how to beat the virus. It's getting a little bit more complicated now coming out of the lockdown. But I do want to say that I thought the speech last week from Ursula von der Leyen on the 27th, I mean, it's quite a powerful speech in terms of solidarity and the response and the financial response that we've seen. And I think it is an example of very good leadership. Now, the question is, as we move out of the pandemic, there is a very, very big leadership question here. And I would just say there's a leadership question for the business community as well. I was disappointed that the business community didn't have more of a voice, for example, in the UK during Brexit, and generally speaking. And I think that's really important because we still have Brexit on the agenda. But in terms of emerging and some really good thinking, Christine Lagarde said yesterday, this is an opportunity for modernizing our economies, for taking on board the green and digital sustainable finance and so on. And I agree with her, but what I'd like to ask the speakers to address is, what do you think the elements are of taking that on board? What will determine, what voices will determine both nationally and from a European point of view, the implementation of what we're seeing? Because already I'm hearing small business, for example, saying that they are not getting, there is a time issue. One of the speakers mentioned time. And I thought that was a really very important point. How time and speed, before businesses collapse, before the public get disillusioned, we've got to try and transfer that support we got from the public into these new measures, I think. And it's going to have to be innovative, and the citizen is going to have to see that they are gaining as we move forward as well. So I think in some ways it could be an exciting time, but it does require, not reverting to type, as somebody said earlier. We did hear, is reverting to type. I mean, people want to see agriculture thriving. They don't want to, they want to see a just transition. We have to emphasize the just transition as well, I think. And a welcome again that was 40 billion as opposed to 7.5. So it's more a comment, but I'd be very interested in what our speakers have to say about those issues, because it is a time of opportunity potentially with this amount of extraordinary funding available. Nevertheless, huge challenges, particularly for small business, to take it on board. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Francis. And indeed, I can be quite vocal on this, but this is not the moment. You asked directly to our speakers. May I have a short reaction from our speakers to what Francis just said, because I think she was spot on.
Do you want me to
Toni,
go first?
Bernhard? Yeah, no, and I would say we are almost out of time. We are out of time, so go for it. Is that Bernhard who wants to go, or who did I hear?
Yeah, well, I can only, let's say, more from the perspective of a German that looks like the programs and everything, what was done in short, workers subsidies and helps and all the other stuff in a bureaucratic way. I only have secondhand information of what I'm reading and I'm seeing. It was well done, so I can almost, and of course this was all done on a national level. Applaud our government in the 16 regions, and to be decentralized was far better than other countries. So I don't want again to be stereotyped, but I think the Germans got it right and very well.
Yeah, well, it was clear now in answer to the crisis. Yes, I am very much in favor of a European solution, but it's also clear that when the crisis really started, citizens expected their own elected government to act first. What was a big difference with the last crisis, of course, is that governments indeed acted quickly by setting up guarantee schemes. There, of course, you could see the difference in the capacity of the economy, and Germany is its huge economy of Germany is helping there. So that's why, indeed, now in the further discussions, we need to find a European solution rather than a national one. But I could I could understand that the first reaction was national. And also, I must say that the ECB and the single supervisor reacted very, very decisively. So indeed, the first reaction to the first shock was right. Now we need a European solution, and we also need, in my view, get down to the details, because it's, as many of the speakers said, it is very easy to be in favor of everything, but if we can't deliver to the citizens, they are not ready. If you don't have any income, you're not ready to make it green or to do any green investment, because you just need food. And that is the kind of decision and leadership that is needed. And actually, I must say we're on track. What I've heard, and indeed from Mrs. von der Leyen, Mrs. Lagarde, they have made pretty strong statements, and it is up to all of us to make sure that they're at the European level.
Maybe two comments, Wim, if I may.
Yes, of course.
I think the first one, I think the need for data has been very rightly emphasized, and I would like to remind everybody that the Commission has started the review of the non-financial reporting directive, and I think it is going to be very important that we ensure the connection between the taxonomy and the non-financial reporting directive, and that it is extremely important that we move to a proper standard. Right now, there is too much divergence and fragmentation in that space.
Yes, and we count on the accountants on this.
We are here. We'll do that. We'll help. Okay. Maybe another point, because I think it's been very rightly emphasized, the success of Germany in managing the crisis. But I think this raises an important point on what needs to be centralized, what needs to be local. And finding the right balance here is always very difficult. There are a number of matters where, however, I think European centralization, if I may say so, will be essential. The NFRD is one. We can't have 27 regimes of reporting in Europe. And if you look at the accounting directive, it still includes more than 100 options. So we count on the Commission, but also the Parliament, to prevent the multiplication of options. And when it comes to state aid, I think it would be very important that the conditionality of state aid is agreed at European level, because we see a lot of member states going their own way and subsidizing their national champions, whether this champion is green, brown, or black. And I think we need to do something about this.
That is a strong message. I'm running out of time, so if I may do the following. Roger, I would like to give you the floor from the European Investment Fund's perspective very shortly, And then I give the floor, if I may, to Othmar to say last words, because I'm over time. Sorry for that, but it is such an important discussion, and I'm enjoying listening to all of you. So, Roger?
Yeah, thank you very much. I will make 4 short points. The first one is we have a lot of possible legal bases and instruments and initiatives. I think we need to be very clear on what we want to achieve with each of them and how we will make them as complementary as possible,
yeah,
and avoiding overlaps. The second point is we need to be smart in the design. It's not only about using field-tested instruments, also about making sure that we have instruments that are appealing, both for the final beneficiaries, but also for the intermediaries, so that we can join forces and that we have aligned interest also with investors. And there are ways to do it, and there are ways not to do it. We need also to be mindful in doing this that we don't create, on the other hand, again, disproportionate requirements. I hear a lot about viable, solvent companies. Think about how you will implement such requirements. What do you ask? If you ask, is this a group of SMEs? How much, checks do you want to have? So we need to have something where the left hand and the right hand are working together, and where one is not undermining the other with good intentions, but not implementable. The third one is we need to have measurement. And we heard a lot about SDG and ESG. We have been working for many, many months on this. Many people are talking about SDG and ESG, but very often it's scratching the surface. Unless you have some incentive also built in achieving the SDG goals, and unless our programs are also framed in SDGs, including the policy objectives, how much innovation, how is it measured, we will not go all the way we want to go. And the last one is we need to have a different culture, going from volumes, and we hear all the billions, to impacts. This is what we should be measuring. Of course, SDG and ESG are tools, but we need to have a culture of impact. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Yeah, very clear. Othmar, dear Chairman, I turn to you to close this meeting and tell you that I must say it is, for me, it's most informative and very interesting to learn to listen to all the experts and the members of the European Parliament. So Othmar, please, the floor is yours.
So thank you. I cannot say more. Thank you for your time, your remarks, your support, yes, and also your advice. See you at the 4th EPFSF webinar, and please be on our side in the next time where we have to go to the details. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you all who participated. A special thanks again to the speakers and the members of European Parliament. This is an important debate, so this is just one moment, but we will continue to work closely at real European solutions that work for the citizens and rebuild our economy. And I look forward to see you again at the next EPFSF seminar or webinar, I should say. Thank you for your time, and all who have been listening for their time, and look forward to continue the debate. Thanks to our chairman, Othmar Karas. Goodbye.
Thank you.